More information has come out about the Tahoe avalanche tragedy that killed 9 skiers on February 17th, 2026, the deadliest avalanche in the United States in the last 45 years. In this video, I'm going to go over the snow conditions, the terrain, and the human factor traps the group would have been dealing with. Then, I'm going to show you alternative routes out and 4 steps you can do to avoid this tragedy. The purpose of this video is not to cast blame. It's to educate and inform. To do that, we have to acknowledge that mistakes were made. I empathize with this as an avalanche survivor myself. I got incredibly lucky and survived and learned from my mistakes. It's an experience that I share openly with all my guests and avalanche students so that they can learn from it. That near-death experience set me on a mission to save lives from avalanches as an educator and the founder of AspectAvy, a safety tool specifically designed to keep you alive in the backcountry. I also want to preface, it's easy to be an armchair expert, but it's much more complex in the field. The mafia has their omerta, or code of silence. The backcountry has had its code of silence for far too long, and that time has passed. Let's talk openly about our mistakes so we can save lives in the future. With that in mind, let's dive into what we know. First, some background. This is a guided backcountry trip consisting of 15 people, 11 clients, and 4 professional mountain guides. Many of the clients were experienced skiers, mothers, and close friends who had planned this trip well in advance over President's Day weekend. They had been staying at the Frog Lake backcountry huts since Sunday, February 15th at about 7,600 feet, accessible only by ski, snowboard, or snowshoe. This was a 3-day trip, and February 17th was the final day, the day they needed to get out and go back home. Snow began falling the night of Sunday the 15th, and forecasters were calling for 4 to 8 feet along the Sierra crest. By the morning of the 17th, conditions were extreme. 50-mile-an-hour winds out of the southwest, snowing at 4 inches an hour. This is mind-blowing. Most people will not ever experience that rate of snowfall in their lives, and combined with the wind, really difficult conditions. In fact, this was the 3rd largest storm on record since 1971. These are outlier conditions. I-80 near Diner Summit was shut down indefinitely. That's where the cars were dropped off. This was not a normal storm day. This was a historic event. The nearest weather station recorded 40 inches of settled storm snow. But the real problem was underneath. The Sierra Avalanche Center had been warning about a weak, sugary old snow layer on northerly facing slopes. On the morning of the 17th, the avalanche danger was rated high, which means natural avalanches are likely, human-triggered are very likely. All aspects and all elevations are dangerous, with the northerly facing slopes being extra dangerous because of that weak, sugary layer. The Sierra Avalanche Center's advisory that day was high avalanche danger continues. Travel in, near, or below avalanche terrain is not recommended. They also warned that avalanches up to D3 in size were likely. That's large enough to bury a car or destroy a house. So it's the morning of the 17th. It's been snowing all night. The danger is set high with a known weak layer on north aspects. The guides have their morning meeting privately, and while we can't know for sure exactly what they discussed, there were pretty much 4 main options to choose from. Option 1, stay at the hut. The survivors confirmed there were ample food and water at the hut, so waiting out the storm for another day or even 2 would have been no problem logistically. Option 2, the long way. They could head northeast through low-angle terrain that avoided any private property, and this route would drop them in a subdivision far from where their cars were parked. But it would have basically removed the threat of being avalanched entirely. Option 3, the bailout. This was a route to the south of the hut. It was still a slog back to I-80 to get to the cars, and in order to avoid private property, it would have still taken them through some higher risk avalanche terrain. The key here, though, is where the south-facing slopes lacked the persistent weak layer that the north-facing slopes had, and lacked the wind loading from the winds coming from the southwest. Option 4, shorter and better rewards. The route leads back to the north, similar to the approach, over the northeast shoulder of Perry's Peak. It requires far less walking through the flats and would give the group a few turns in the process. But it's also the riskiest, forcing the group to navigate through multiple avalanche zones on and below north-facing terrain, which is right where the weak layer was lurking. The upside? You get some turns and it drops you directly back at the car. The guides chose option 4. While we can't be certain why they chose this route, as a guide, my best guess is you're opting for the shortest route that takes you right back to your cars, and you're getting turns. But this decision put the group directly under the most dangerous avalanche terrain of the other choices. We know from the survivor accounts that the stay at the hut option was not discussed with the group. The guides told everyone they needed to leave, and they needed to leave quickly. There was no discussion with the clients, and no one raised any concerns. From the New York Times survivor account, we know they set off to the northeast. By all accounts, the team reached the Saddle Ridge by about 10 a.m. They transitioned, took their skins off, and skied through the old-growth forest down to the valley floor. There, they transitioned again into walk mode and put the skins back on to trek to the southwest. The time is roughly about 10:45. The team proceeded southwest through the valley floor, along the Red Dot Trail roughly below the north face of Perry's Peak. This is the critical part. They were traveling in the runout zone, the flat area at the bottom of the slope, beneath a loaded north-facing start zone. We don't know if the avalanche released naturally or was remotely triggered by the group from down in the flats. What we do know is that a slab of snow broke loose and ran about 400 vertical feet down to the valley floor. Someone saw it coming and yelled avalanche, but it overtook them quickly. Of the 15 in the group, 13 were caught by the avalanche. 1 was partially buried, and 12 were fully buried under the snow. 3 were rescued alive, 9 were killed. The slope angle at the start zone was about 36 to 40 degrees. For reference, 30 degrees is considered the beginning of avalanche-prone terrain. This is a high-risk avalanche start zone for high danger. Now, here's something that really stands out to me, the runout angle. Picture a string pinned to the avalanche crown line, that's the highest point of the start zone, stretched all the way down to the furthest extent of the debris pile. That angle, the hypotenuse, measured in the field was about 22 degrees. This is significant. Only about 5% of avalanches build up enough momentum to slide that far into the flats. And that really only happens at high or extreme danger when you have massive amounts of snow moving, which is exactly the conditions they saw on that day. Given how hard the snow is falling at 4 inches an hour and blowing at 50 miles an hour at the nearby weather station at the time of the avalanche, it's likely the group wasn't able to see their proximity to the slope above. Maybe not even at all. They would have been relying on the guide's familiarity with the zone at this point. Bottom line, on a day when avalanches are very likely to be triggered by humans, we need to give a larger buffer to the avalanche runouts. The avalanche was classified as a D2.5 on the destructive scale and categorized as a soft slab, storm slab event. The victims were found in a roughly 20 by 20 foot area near the maximum extent of the debris field. They were buried 5 to 8 feet deep in a depression bound by trees and boulders, a train trap that allowed the debris to pile up much deeper than in the surrounding area. Looking at the slide path from the toe of the debris, it doesn't look super scary. There are a good number of trees, but it's not enough to prevent a slide from releasing or moving through them. I don't need to go into the details of the rescue. Read the New York Times article for those. But know when avalanche debris settles, it sets up like snowplow debris, like concrete on the side of the road in minutes. Thick, heavy, very difficult to dig through. Okay, so we need to talk about the human factor traps. Avalanches are unpredictable, and humans are even more so, because when faced with complex, ambiguous decisions, we revert to caveman brain and use heuristics to give us quick answers that feel good and don't take up a lot of energy. Given the very difficult weather and avalanche conditions, here are 3 traps that if I was in their shoes or ski boots, I could see myself falling in, even as an experienced mountain guide, and I would have to push back hard against. The first one is familiarity. Parties traveling in familiar terrain tend to make riskier decisions than parties traveling in unfamiliar terrain, especially for parties with substantial experience and training. In this case, the group had already traveled through this terrain on the way to the hut, and it's the route with the most rewards. So it's likely they've chosen this route often in the past. The second one is commitment. Parties that were highly committed to a goal, a summit, ski run, or an objective in deteriorating weather made riskier decisions than parties just out for a day. This effect is most pronounced in parties of 4 or more. In this case, they're committed to leaving the hut and getting back to their cars. Plus, everyone likely has busy lives and needs to get back to their families. As a guide, I'm constantly getting pressure from clients saying they have to be back for their jobs, non-refundable plane tickets, or their daughter's dance recital. The third one is the expert halo. Accident parties often contain a leader, someone who's more experienced or older, or a guide, and novices are most likely to follow that leader into dangerous situations. In this case, there are 4 professional guides, so the clients likely felt confident following the guides. Some remedies to these human factor traps. Familiarity. Ask yourself, are conditions unusual or outlier? If yes, then my previous experience will not apply, and I need to adjust my actions to fit the demands of the outlier conditions. The second one, commitment. Set the non-negotiable risk parameters at home while doing pre-trip planning. This is like Odysseus having his men tie him to the mast to resist the siren's call for powder. We will only travel this route at moderate danger. If it's forecasted to be high danger during the hut trip, we've already agreed we are leaving a day early. The last one is expert halo. Trust, but verify. Everyone in the group has access to tools for tour planning, like AspectAvy. This allows the entire group to use data-driven, objective facts to come to a decision together on the risk, instead of just following a leader. Let me walk through the alternative decisions and be transparent about the pressure against each one. Cancel or cut the trip short. They could have left Monday when the danger was at considerable. Still elevated, but manageable. Now, this is hard because it hadn't snowed in 6 weeks and hut reservations are difficult to get. This is valuable vacation time spent with friends. Plus, Monday skiing was incredible. There's a real pressure to make the most of the trip, especially in a drought-stricken year. The next option is stay at the hut. Wait an extra day or 2 until the danger dropped. This is harder than it sounds. People have really busy lives, work, family, childcare. For instance, I've been in a Swiss hut that was hit by an avalanche in the night and woke us up. And a team left at breakfast to go out into the storm because they had flights to get back to the UK for work. The next option is take the flat way out. If you absolutely had to get back to town and you're an expert at navigation with only instruments in 0 visibility in a historic storm, and you're also sure you have enough battery supply on your phone, you can do it. You can stay out of avalanche terrain altogether and get back to the groomed Nordic trails after about 1.5 miles. So that'll be a lot less trail breaking. And that route is about 4 miles total to get to a housing subdivision and call for a car pickup. Any of these options would have likely resulted in different outcome. Here's the part that's going to be hard to hear. Dying in an avalanche is optional. We need to stop calling these avalanche accidents. They're almost entirely optional. And that makes each death a tragedy. Our backcountry community celebrates a culture of risk. As a community, we are risk junkies that are willing to risk it all for our fix and chafe at any restrictions on our freedom. Yet, in contrast, when we drive, we all agree to follow red lights, stop signs, and school zone speed limits. And drunk driving is clearly not acceptable. We agree as a society to have the freedom to drive within these guardrails to keep us safe. What if we had similar guardrails in the backcountry to support good decisions? This is why I built AspectAvy, to save lives with clear stop or go risk guardrails. AspectAvy is free for everyone in the backcountry community. Even the least experienced guest can check my decisions as a guide at a glance and question my decision making. Okay, talking about death and dying in an avalanche is intense. And hopefully that's given you some tools and some homework to keep your team safer in avalanche terrain. And I'd invite you to join us and make avalanche deaths a thing of the past. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the backcountry.